All right, we're actually going to talk about how scoping works with some very basic examples. You've heard of var, let, and const, and you've heard people say, well, we used to have var, but it's bad because it's globally scoped. So we replaced it with let and const, and it's better because it's block scoped. But they never really explain what it means, or people give really complicated examples. But it's actually very, very simple. Let's talk about what does globally scoped actually mean. Let's say var name is equal to my name, Philip. This is globally scoped. Let name is equal to, let's say, Bob. This, technically, since it's on the global scope of our JavaScript file, you may think it's also globally scoped, but it's not. It's just block scope. Okay? So inside of JavaScript's engine, after I think ES6, what happens is that JavaScript actually wraps all of your code of this file inside of curly braces. So this is only globally scoped inside of JavaScript engine's scope. The things that live outside the engine scope are things that's attached. What do you mean by attached? Attached means it lives on the window object, like window.document, right? Window.setTimeout, things like that. Okay, before we even go into that, let's look at these two. And then, name 2 is equal to Bob. Okay, now when something is truly globally scoped, it lives on the window object. Window.name, window.name2. No, okay, so this is not truly global. This is block scoped. Okay, what does block scope actually mean? A block is a set of curly braces. So in JavaScript, it's any curly braces that's not from an object literal definition. So if you do something like this is not a scope. Okay. But did you know, even just a pair of random curly braces like this is a scope. Okay. Look, let name is equal to Philip. If we do let name is equal to Bob here, we get an error. Identified name has already been declared. Because when JavaScript gets to line 7, it sees let. So it's going to check this whole scope up here and down here to see if there's any other variables with the same name. And it finds Bob. So it says, nope, can't do that. But if you put it in here, you get no error, okay? Because it only cares about its own scope. The first one has all of this and all of the bottom. And the second one inside stays inside of its bracket. Okay, this is scope, or you see or hear fancy people say it's lexical environment, which is the same thing as a scope. Okay. All right. So how is this actually useful? Let's do an if statement. Let's say if name is triple equals to Philip, we're going to run something. So this is a new block or scope. And then in here, I'm going to do 2 more scopes. And then here, I'm going to let name is equal to Bob. Let name is equal to Johnny. And I'm going to console.log name. What do you think is going to happen here? Is it going to be Bob, Johnny, or Philip? Bob. Yeah. So why is it Bob and not Johnny? Well, remember what block scope means. When you console.log the variable name, console.log lives inside of this last scope right here. Okay. So it's going to try to find a variable in its own scope. Okay. Let's say we put name in its own scope. Const name is equal to blah, blah, blah. Okay, it finds that in its scope. If we take it out, why doesn't it go to Johnny? Well, remember, scopes, things look for your variable names inside of that scope, and then it goes to the parent scope. Okay. Bob is the parent scope. Johnny is just a sibling scope, right? Because these are neighbors. This curly brace and this curly brace are neighbors. Okay. Scope, I'll just call this scope A, scope B, aka A's neighbor. Okay. And when you're a neighbor, you don't have access to their variables. Okay, you go one level up. If it goes one level up and it does not see Bob, what does it do? Well, it console.logs Philip, right? Because that is the next level up. Cool, right? So that's how scope actually works with let and const. Okay, let's move on. Now, let's see what happens if we console.log name, and inside of that scope, we define the name variable after it. Now, let's see what will happen. Let's say blah, blah, blah. Okay, it says cannot access name. Why didn't it just go to Philip or Bob? Well, remember the difference between hoisting and initialization. Let and const is always hoisted, okay, to the same scope that it's defined in. So it's hoisted here, and then JavaScript execution context runs. Execution means it's going to go line by line. But before that, remember, as I said in the last video, it already memorized all of the variable names with const and let. It knows it exists, but it leaves the value as undefined. Okay? So now, when you do this, it checks the scope of console.log, which is this. It finds that there is a variable in memory, but it cannot access that yet. Because of that, it will not go to the outer scope and get name equals Bob. It will just tell you that, hey, I actually found a name here, but I don't have access to it yet, okay, because you're calling me before this line actually gets defined in your script. So I'm just going to give you an error. Okay? And this is actually good, because if it does what we want it to do right now, and it goes to Bob, in big applications, this will actually lead to a lot of errors. That's why scope and closure is very important. And closure, I'll just give you the definition. Closure is access to variables on outer scopes, but not inner scopes. That's as basic as it's going to get. And I know it goes much deeper than that, but that's saying something like, if I do name right here and I do console.log inside a bunch of nested scopes, since name is on an outer scope, it will have access to that because it goes out and out, right? But let's say if in here I do const obj is equal to an object, and then on the outside I do console.log obj, okay, it's not defined. Now let's talk about why using var and it creates a true global scope is bad. Let's say we have var array is equal to 5. We get no error, even though array is a constructor. Okay, so since var is globally scoped, window.array equals to 5? Yes. But now what happened to our array constructor? It's gone, so we can't use that anymore. That's why var is bad, because you can accidentally replace objects or methods on your window. Now, if we use let, let's delete this, let array is equal to 5. Now, if we type array, 5 equals true. Now, what if we do window.array equal to 5? Nope, right? This, like I said, is because JavaScript wraps a global scope. Okay? So that's why the window objects are not affected, and it prevents us from making crucial errors like that. Okay. All right, I hope everything was helpful.